What if I told you that there was a secret Roman god that no one knew about? Well, we actually have two, Ares and Aphrodite. In this video, we gonna tell you everything about them and show you how to spot these gods in Rome. But first, we need to go back to Greece. Meet Zeus, king of the gods and ruler of Mount Olympus. He's so powerful that he can control the weather and throw lightning bolts from his hands. But Zeus has a big problem. You see, he's getting too old and he needs an heir to take over the kingdom. So he holds a contest. The gods bring their best babies to the top of Mount Olympus, where Zeus will choose the strongest and smartest one to be his successor. And just as Zeus is about to make his decision, along comes another baby. It's so beautiful that Zeus drops his hammer in surprise. No one knows who the baby's father is, but everyone agrees that it must be the most handsome baby of them all. And so Zeus welcomes the child into Olympus and raises him as his own son, naming him Jupiter, which means father of the gods. Now, you might be thinking that this is a very suspicious story, especially because it's suspiciously similar to another one about a baby being born, going straight to Olympus and becoming the king of the gods. Yeah, me too. In fact, we know exactly who this mysterious father is. It's Cronus, the leader of the Titans, who is also raised by his father, Uranus. Now, you might be asking yourself, is Jupiter just a copy of Zeus? Not quite. See, while they do share some similarities, like their love of parties and their habit of seducing mortals, there are also some important differences between them. For example, Jupiter is even more powerful than Zeus, able to control not only the weather, but also the fate of the world. He's also more merciful and less vengeful, often giving humans second chances when they mess up. That's why we made a whole video about him. If you want to learn more about the biggest differences between Zeus and Jupiter, click here. But for now, let's get back to our list of secret gods. Next up is Ares, the god of war. Unlike Jupiter, Ares is pretty much the same as his Greek equivalent, except for one small detail. Ares is known for being hot-headed and reckless, while Romans saw Mars as a more noble and strategic warrior. This difference in perception can be seen in the way they worship the god. While Greeks made Ares a fearsome helmet with tusks and wings, Romans depicted Mars wearing a Roman helmet with a crest on top. They also associated him with strategy and intelligence, showing him with a spear and shield instead of weapons. This is because the Romans valued intelligence and planning in war, as exemplified by their military tactics and strategies. They believed that Mars was the embodiment of these qualities, and that by honoring him, they would be more likely to succeed in battle. But Mars wasn't the only god of war. Romans also revered Bellona, a goddess of war who personified its violence and bloodshed. She was often depicted carrying a sword or a torch that was said to ride a chariot drawn by fiery horses. However, unlike Ares, Bellona was not considered a major deity and had no temples or cults dedicated to her in Rome. Instead, she was mostly worshipped alongside Mars and other gods of war. So, what about love? Who is the Roman goddess of love and beauty? You guessed it, Aphrodite. But wait, didn't she come from Greece too? Yep, same deal. Romans just called her Venus. Unlike Ares and Aphrodite though, Venus was a lot more popular in Rome. The Romans built massive temples for her and made her coins and statues. They even named one of their moons after her. But you'll never guess what the craziest thing they did to her was. Instead of making her a goddess of war, they made her a goddess of fertility and prosperity. See, in Roman religion, Venus was associated with the abundance of crops and the health of livestock. She was also believed to protect sailors on their journeys and to help them navigate the seas. What an upgrade, huh? But that's not all. Romans also linked her to the planet Venus, which they believed was her chariot riding across the sky. They even invented a festival in her honor called the Lupercalia, which celebrated the she-wolf that supposedly nursed Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome. But as you may have guessed, the Greeks had a similar festival for their version of Aphrodite. It was called the Panathenea, and it was held in Athens to honor the goddess's role as the patron of the city. During the celebration, young women would offer their virginity to Aphrodite in exchange for her blessing. Wow. The last god on our list is probably the most interesting one. You see, unlike the other gods who had Greek counterparts, there was no Greek god who was directly equivalent to this one. I'm talking about none other than the emperor himself. Now you might be wondering, why did the Romans worship their leaders as gods? Well, it's because of the way Roman emperors were portrayed in public. They were always shown wearing a crown and a laurel wreath, just like the gods. They were also deified after they died. That means they were given the title of a god and sometimes even had temples built for them. But this practice wasn't unique to the emperors. Any Roman leader could be deified, like generals, consuls, and even popes. However, there was one god who was above all others, Jupiter. He was considered the supreme leader of the Roman pantheon and was often shown ruling over other gods from a mountain, just like Zeus. In fact, the Romans even made Jupiter the father of the imperial family. According to legend, Julius Caesar was the descendant of the god, and Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, was actually called Octavian. But don't worry, we got that joke. Okay, now you might be asking yourself, did the Romans really believe that their leaders were gods? And the answer is surprisingly complicated. See, the Roman religion was actually polytheistic, meaning that they believed in many gods. However, they didn't have a strict doctrine or a single book that laid out their beliefs. Instead, their religion was based on tradition, custom, and the teachings of their priests. This meant that the Romans were free to interpret the myths and legends however they wanted, and they often used them to justify their actions. For example, the story of Romulus killing his twin brother Remus was used to explain why the Romans were destined to be a powerful and ruthless empire. Similarly, the deification of emperors was seen as a way to ensure their continued support and loyalty among the people. As a result, it's impossible to say exactly what the Romans believed about their leaders. Some may have genuinely believed that they were gods, while others may have seen them as simply human leaders who were elevated to godlike status through propaganda and tradition. Whatever the case may be, the worship of the emperor as a god was a significant part of Roman culture and played a major role in the development of their empire. Wow, so what's the main difference between the Greek and Roman gods? Here's your hint, it's dark. The Greek gods were known for their flaws and their humanity. They were often depicted as having human-like characteristics, such as jealousy, anger, and revengefulness. This was in stark contrast to the Roman gods, who were seen as more noble, virtuous, and divine. For example, the Greeks made a big deal out of Ares's violent and impulsive nature, while the Romans preferred to focus on Mars's strategic and disciplined side. But there was one area where the Romans took things to the next level. While both cultures had their share of cruel and merciless gods, the Romans had a few deities who were truly terrifying. These dark gods were rarely worshipped and were mostly feared. Take Pluto, for instance. He was the god of the underworld and was so scary that even his name was avoided. Instead, people would refer to him as Despoter or Orcus. Then there was the goddess of witchcraft, magic, and ghosts. People wouldn't even utter her name, fearing that she would hear them and curse them. Instead, they would use euphemisms like Mater Matuta or trivia. But perhaps the darkest of them all was the god of disease, pestilence, and the dead. To avoid invoking his wrath, Romans would call him by a completely different name, Sancus. The Greeks didn't have any god who was as dark and scary as these ones. They had Hades, who was also the god of the underworld, but he wasn't as cruel or merciless as Pluto. They also had Hecate, who was a goddess of witchcraft and magic, but she wasn't as evil or dangerous as the Roman goddess. And while they did have a god of disease and death, Apollo, he wasn't as feared or reviled as Pluto or Sancus. These dark gods were truly unique to the Romans, and they added a whole new level of depth and complexity to their religion.